Welcome back, venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am Amar, and together with Taurus, I feel like you need to take over before I get bedridden talking about different kind of melodies.
Oh no, I regret to inform you everyone, but MR has come down with a severe case of pneumoniaitis. Yes, it's lethal. It is a slow, agonizing death where he will be bedridden and we will spend many weeks visiting him. And the sad music will be playing in the background. I can hear the sad violins already. We're gonna have a tearful moment. But no, MR is healthy and fine, especially because he is not a cute anime girl set in the world of visual novels. In this episode, yes, we want to tackle the ever-present, I guess you could say, trope of heroines struck with some sort of medical condition that usually keeps them bedridden. It's very much played up for sympathy and the story elements of the main character visiting or caring for someone who is definitely not in good health. And the story beats that follow as well. Is that right, Amar?
Yeah, and specifically for this episode, we handpicked examples to talk about that are more or less revolving about how that central medical condition centralizes the story. That is not really a spoiler, but a central point. There's many kinds of different afflictions. We tended to focus on more from the, let's say, body function, not necessarily the mental disorder. So I debated whether or not to bring for example, Sayano Uta, who the protagonist suffers from the very advanced agnosia. I have few other examples to talk about today.
Yeah, but that Sayano Uta example doesn't quite fit in with the idea of someone who needs caretaking help from another, someone who has that poor health and is very limited in what terms of physical activities he or she can do. As you can see by the thumbnail, the image of someone laying in the hospital for an extended period of time. For vague
in
or...
Sayano Uta, yeah. In the Sayano Uta example, it's more of a condition the protagonist lives with and hides from others, right? So there is no care given or anything like that. It just shapes his world and then he moves on, let's say.
And there's a ton of examples, from what I could think of, in visual novels, where this sort of thing happens midway or maybe at the climax of a heroine route, where suddenly things go sideways and then it becomes very dramatic out of nowhere. And I mean, I suppose those can also be examples, but for the sake of spoilers, it's best not to mention, of course. Which is weird because as a premise, it also works just as strong, but I couldn't think of any off the top of my head as much as I could as, elements of drama showing up later. But yes, starting off at the beginning, establishing a character as being in poor health and limited in activities. That's what the classic, anime trope is about for having a sick heroine.
Exactly. And the first example that came to my head preparing for this episode has to be Narciso. So, Narciso is a story that follows an anonymous protagonist diagnosed with a terminal illness. It's never specified what kind of illness it is, just protagonist, terminal illness, go. And this character spends what seems to be countless days in a hospital ward designated for such cases. With little hope, we see perspective of a person quite literally withering away in a suffocating silence, surrounded by almost blinding walls of this hospital ward. After meeting another character in the same boat, they together decide to make one last adventure together to feel something. And it is not an easy read. I feel like the feeling of inevitability in this title is amplified by the mere fact that this is a kinetic visual novel and you can't change fate. So it was definitely not an easy or cheery read. Definitely something that made me think and put up a very unique atmosphere.
Interesting. I was actually going to suggest that with these kind of sick heroines involved, is that a common theme is of hope, wouldn't it? The idea of wanting to care for someone and seeing that rise at the end, hoping for it, even though there might be scares along the way. Is that something you would say rings true for Narcissu? Because you just mentioned on the other hand that now there's that whole element of you can't fight this prophecy. So what do you think, Amar?
Well, I'm not going to spoil the title, but they really put into the perspective the crushing reality of having to live with terminal illness and counting days. And over time getting numb to the idea of having your days quite literally numbered, which motivates those characters to maybe take the destiny in their own hands and go out on their own terms. And thus this rebellious adventure begins. It again, it's not an easy title to digest. It is something that wasn't easy to read either. Definitely not one of those cheery VNs. Now, you asked about hope and maybe overturning crisis. I don't believe, to the best of my ability that I remember, that they ever crossed out hope. They kind of clung on to it. So there is that feeling of helplessly and hopelessly clinging on to hope, but being surrounded with doubt and having gotten the doctor's note on having that terminal illness, it is a very internal conflict. Again, this is a very heavy VN to read. It is very much an internal and sombering experience. It is quite unique in that, I have to say.
And to be fair, we don't see many visual novels, I guess you could say, in line with this kind of messaging, this kind of mood.
I would agree. There's very few VNs brave enough to showcase such struggles a lot of the time. And honestly, for good reasons. The VNs want to inspire hope and show that you can, with the power of friendship, you can overcome everything, right? This is more on the realistic side, meaning that kind of feeling of helplessness and hopelessness can fester when all you hear is doom and gloom.
I think that's one element of what reading a story really contributes to making a visual novel good. And then what helps for getting the reader to get engrossed in the stories too. Because by definition, stories are meant for you to escape from real life. You're in a world of fantasy. You're experiencing all sorts of things that are new and alien to you, perhaps. And so I think that escapism, is a good thing, because that's what really allows you to live within a story, and in some cases even teaches you a few things about yourself or about others, or empathy or life lessons. And so, being able to read a difficult story like Narcissu is I think, a good experience for a reader to read, right?
I would agree. Oddly enough, despite what I said so far, I did not feel that emotional reading it, but definitely I felt introspective, right? Trying to see how those characters deal with the cards they were dealt made me think, okay, how I would relate and or maybe navigate such a situation. So it was very thought-provoking, even though in my opinion it wasn't that emotional. But I know that for different people it was very much a Nakige kind of VN. For me, I rarely get invested, especially on the shorter side. I really have hard time immersing myself in VNs. So that kind of barrier doesn't make me emphasize on a deeper level with those characters, but definitely made me retrospective. That's true.
Interesting.
So that was one of those VNs.
Mm-hmm. I was just about to
It was
ask
one
you.
of those.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
No. It was one of those, definitely those VNs that after reading, I sat down and I was thinking, okay, what did I just read? And how it would, I wouldn't say immediately affect me, but how I would navigate such situations. Do I agree with that approach of that kind of rebellion against all odds? Yeah.
It's one of those things that you might have an idea of how you would act, sitting in a place of security, I suppose. But when you're in the moment and the emotions are swirling around your mind, how we think we'll act and how we actually act sometimes might be two different things, right?
Oh, 100%, I agree. Yeah, it is.
I wanted to ask, because this whole idea of the sick heroine is meant to build up sympathy for a character, I was going to ask you, even though you perhaps weren't as attached to the story, to the VN in general, did these illness aspects make you more empathetic to the characters themselves, to the individual people, whether it was the main character or other characters? But you kind of spoke
Probably
about
yes.
that, right?
Yeah, probably yes. It's definitely an empathetic level, just not as emotional as probably they aimed for reactions from readers, I assume. But definitely I was empathetic of their situation and how crappy cards they were dealt with and had to play by those rules.
I think that's interesting. It's not only just a trope of the whole sick heroine aspect, but tying it into the visual novel at large with the messages and themes it wants to convey alongside. I think that's pretty beautiful in its own way, huh?
Yeah. That was one of the hard and difficult reads that definitely made me realize why people are drawn to Nakige's kind of stories, the tearjerker VMs, even though it didn't work on me, okay? And that was another example of how it didn't really move me as much.
Well,
but I definitely had a retrospective moment in which after reading, I had to sit down and think deeply and quietly.
And wouldn't you say that worked? I mean, a tearjerker doesn't have to have you sobbing hysterically for you to still feel and think about the story like you did, right? So I would still, it still succeeded.
I guess. If we were... Okay, fair enough.
All right, that counts. Okay.
I mean, the fact that it sits with me until this day, and I remember those messages that this VN tried to put forth, is maybe a testament that it kind of worked because it stuck with me, right? Even though it doesn't necessarily make me bawl my eyes out, okay?
Exactly. Then on that though, moving away from Narcissu, there's another title, one that I wanted to bring up in relation to this topic, being Katawa Shoujo. And for anyone who may still be out there and is not aware of this huge VN title, the main character is a teenage boy who suddenly becomes afflicted with a heart condition, one that is a risk to his life. And so, to accommodate, he becomes enrolled in a high school designed for those with disabilities. Many of the students have other physical disabilities that are more visible, much more so than the main character's just a simple heart condition. And so the entire story of Katawa Shoujo, you could say, is meeting all of these characters who have disabilities in some format, and him befriending, learning more about them, living his high school life to the best of his abilities. And what makes Katawa Shoujo interesting is because it goes a lot more beyond this trope, this setup of having a sick, bedridden heroine, because none of the characters that you meet are bedridden. All of them are still able to go to their classes and hang out with their friends and do their homework and have, their limited social lives as much as you can while being a high schooler. And more so beyond that is how fully fleshed out all of the characters are, to go beyond simply what their disability lists them as. Like always, one great standout example for me was Rin, who does not have arms. And yet, instead of just focusing on that, pretty much her entire route, her story, a lot of her focuses on her self-expression as an artist, or her examining herself of what she means to be against the world. And I think that
if you think about it...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to mention that if you think about it, Katawa Shoujo, in all those characters, showcases overcoming the situation they got put in. And you started with Rin, who overcame the problems of being an artist without arms, and other characters similarly showcase how they overcame their own situations. And I remember one message that I embraced by the end of that read was how none of those characters really wanted pity, and how they wanted to be seen as equals. And I remember vividly a moment in which the main character, the protagonist, extends his hand to guide Lily, who's the blind character, and she says, no, I can do it. And that made me pause and think, obviously, she wants to live life not being burdened to others. And if she wants help and or companionship, she will reach out for it. That's the best ending to that situation. Pain. That's a great message.
I like how you mentioned they like overcame their disabilities, and I don't know if I would really say that. It's more of just living their best life. It's not as if, eliminate. Well, I mean, I know we're debating semantics and still, but it just serves to illustrate the mindset that goes on between a lot of the Katawa Shoujo characters. And how it very much flips over this trope of the bedridden, sick, dying heroine in cases you have these characters who very much are not. How they sound similar in name only, and yet their lives are playing out very differently. In fact, I think Katawa Shoujo really does it so that you get the best of both worlds. You do. You get the typical... I hate to say it, uniqueness of the situation between having someone with a terrible, unique disease exclusive to them and not the rest of the cast. But on the other hand, you also get the themes of hope. You also get the rich character development that you see in all of the heroines in Katawa Shoujo. you get to explore the themes from an outside observer too, as the main character, and the whole dynamic plays out there. So even though Katsuwa Shoujo doesn't really fit the topic of what we're talking about in the episode, I still very much think that it serves as a great highlight of the elements of having a sick heroine and how they can be used into a different kind of story to build on that and to learn more and see past beyond it, instead of just leaving it all as a cliche. Katsuwa Shoujo
That's
is
true.
really impressive in that way, yeah. There's a lot of good things going for it, and I'm always amazed that it came out relatively early in the, English visual novel sphere.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about that title because I definitely did not expect how well it will be ingrained in my memory for being something like a free VM from internet, right? Consciousness. Definitely a surprise, to be sure.
I think the story and the characters and the themes really pierce down deeper into the issues. Especially when you have a main character that's at first considers himself an outsider. Someone walking into this world who evolves alongside the reader. And seeing his differences and comparisons with the various members of the cast, some more so alike than him than not. And all the ways that evolves. Part of having a sick heroine involved in stories, in visual novels, is that it really plays up the relationship between the character and the heroine herself. Because of all the, I guess you could say, caretaking aspects, of all the shifting dynamics, and all of the changing circumstances involved, a lot of it still centers around the relationship between the two. And I think you still see that in Katsuwa Shoujo with the other heroines, not just between them and the main character, but with themselves and with the other characters as well.
Yeah, but then when you mentioned the protagonist, don't forget he also suffers from some illness, and in a way he's new to the entire environment. So he learns from others how to best move forward with his current condition.
Absolutely.
Which also flips on its head the idea of, helpless anime waifu needed to be taken care of.
Yeah, because he's no perfect, character either.
Yep.
So yeah, again, even though Katsuwa Shoujo isn't the most perfect example, I think it's very illuminating into this whole idea of a sick heroine.
Yeah. Now, to lighten up the mood a little bit, I brought something on a completely different side of the fence, because I brought forth a VNture 2.
A VNture?
So, yes.
Again?
So, VNture.
Is it really unexpected?
Obviously it is, because it's not the original. So, VNture 2, a sequel to VNture, is set in a different world ruled by hero syndrome, which blesses chosen people with supernatural abilities and magic. But every time they use those blessings, they risk a chance of catching an incurable and deadly sickness, shaping a civilization to be populated by superheroic people dying young, and regular folk who tend to last the longest till the old age. But here comes the protagonist with the miraculous power to heal the hero syndrome. Or so it seems. The plot thickens. So, on one hand, with the setup of this title, it is played straight of how dangerous this world is and how it has been shaped by the existence of the hero syndrome. But on the other hand, the sicknesses themselves and the protagonist with his miraculous power plays on the goofiness of this concept. And why I mean that is a lot of those diseases are played or exaggerated, played for laughs. So for example, one of my favorite disease one of the characters can catch is you can literally have lags.
Lags?
And whoever...
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, lags, as in latency.
Like online video games where you press a button and it
Yeah.
doesn't register until half a second later.
But imagine the comedic timing of creating dialogue between two characters in which the second character responds 3 sentences too late.
Oh my gosh.
Is desynchronized with the rest of the party. It's just hilarious. So a lot of those sicknesses have a deadly ending, but the way they are portrayed is very comedic. Like there is a sickness in which your characters communicate in barks.
Barks?
But it's so deadly because yes, in dog barks. Yes. But you can bark yourself to death if you don't cure it fast enough.
Oh, goodness gracious.
There is a sickness in which you are being reliant upon other. It's called what I have a wiki open with all of those. It is something like ultra reliance on the character, and you can't literally live without that other character. So it's kind of deadly, but at the same time, it's very played for laughs in a comedic sense that such a disease can exist.
And so this is a pretty unique aspect you're saying in where all of these are played for laughs. There's no drama involved.
Yes.
It's entirely just, well, look at all this silly antics going on, and now the party gets sidetracked having to clear it all up.
In a way, it exists on 2 layers, because from the world perspective and inhabitants, all those diseases are crazy deadly. You have the common cold, but in this title, if you use skills, you can catch an emperor cold, the king of all colds, and it's deadly as hell. Okay. Or you can find allergy, a noble allergy, and you need to throw away gold. Otherwise, you will have a deadly rash if you touch gold.
If you touch gold.
Right? So those are played for laughs. Those silly symptoms and effect. But then again, from the standpoint of not being curable, they are very deadly. Now, again, this is one layer of the entire world, but the second layer is there exists a protagonist that can combat those melodies with his power, and thus the story revolves around him going around the world curing all those diseases. So again, it's on one hand from the perspective of a story and setting, and from the grand narrative, those are super evil and deadly diseases. But from the moment to moment adventures, you are set on a quest to cure them all.
Cure them all? Like to eradicate these illnesses completely? Or just... Yeah. Oh my goodness, yeah. Okay. You said it...
And how to synthesize such cures is your basically quest.
That's very unique. I'm pretty sure that if any of these struck in real life, they would be far less funny. But thankfully, they take place in Fantasyland, and we can laugh at all the characters' silly misadventures.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the developers, the Alisoft, who created that, had a lot of fun coming up with those diseases, because they created a very interesting feedback loop in which they affected the gameplay. VNture 2, similarly to VNture 1, has a gameplay element. So in order to incorporate and sell you on the seriousness of those diseases, whenever you catch one, it affects your gameplay. So, for example, I mentioned before you had a clingy disorder in which a character was so clingy to protagonist. In gameplay order, that means she always takes turn after the protagonist, never else.
Interesting.
Okay.
And that doesn't sound necessarily bad. Is there ever a case you would want to keep some of these illnesses because of the beneficial gameplay side effects?
I guess, maybe, but I mean, you are on the quest to cure them all, so you wouldn't do such a thing, okay?
Oh, well, don't tell me
But
how to play my game.
But they make it so they affect the gameplay somewhat. So it's really cute how they did so.
Do any of the characters get, debilitated from these illnesses? I know you mentioned there's some gameplay integration as well, the story lightheartedness, but are there any points where, like, they're, for example, bedridden and, unable to continue?
I don't remember. Probably on the story aspect, they tend to be bedridden, but it is solvable with, the cure being developed as we speak. There are some episodes in which you have to tend to some characters, that's true. But majority of those melodies are during your adventures. And you need to make a medic tent in the wilderness to cure some of them on the go. You don't want someone to suffer from kitty syndrome, right? And meow away.
Hey, you tell me. I should be asking you that, Amar. Ay. So on that unique note, that's a good place to wrap things up for today. Thank you everyone for listening. There are many examples out there, I'm sure, in the world of visual novels where diseases and medical conditions take their toll on a character, and this is definitely just the tip of the iceberg.
Thanks to all our listeners, and venture out.
Venture out.